stories, and unfortunately, but fortunately, one of you did. So I want to thank you, a special thank you to you, and you know who you are. So I'm going to start with that story, and then I will move on to some spooky stories I found on Reddit. I hope you enjoy this video, and again, happy Halloween. A few years ago, me and a 10 friend went urban exploring from time to time. My friend had asked me if I wanted to tag along to an abandoned house, and of course I did. So we drove to a forest about an hour away from where we lived. By the time we arrived, it was starting to get dark, but there were still enough light to see. We did, however, pack 2 flashlights to make sure we wouldn't get stuck in the dark. The 2 of us started following a path through the forest. In a general direction of the house, but we weren't exactly sure where the house was. We tried looking it up on Google Maps, but the house wasn't on an official road, so it couldn't help us. With urbexing, a lot of locations are quite secretive, and you can call yourself lucky when you can get coordinates. But we didn't have those either. Yet, we continued to walk because we knew it had to be around there somewhere. After walking another 5 minutes or so, suddenly my friend and I both proclaimed at the same time that it was here. Without having seen it yet, we both just knew or felt that we had reached the house. And yes, right behind the bend in the road, behind some trees, we found the house. We couldn't get into the building because there was a camera and a fence, and we didn't want to break any laws. For you. So we decided to just roam around the building for a while to see if we could see into the windows or find anything cool. The building looked like an old farmhouse. There really wasn't anything special about it. It was a bit creepy, but an abandoned building isn't creepy at night. After looking around for a bit, my friend pointed a flashlight at the window and suddenly felt a heavy pressure on my chest. I can't describe it properly, what it felt like. Maybe like when you're about to have a panic attack, or when you're extremely stressed out. Right after feeling that sensation, I saw a little light pop up onto the corner of my eyes. I tried looking at it, but it ran around the corner of the house, seemingly trying to get us to follow it. We were hesitant, and I can't tell you why. We decided to take a couple of steps into the direction the orb had disappeared to. As we did so, I walked past some wooden stairs, which presumably had been behind the door in the past, but were now accessible from the outside of the building that led into the attic. I heard voices and humming coming from upstairs. I couldn't make out any words, but it did sound like a female hum and 2 males hum. It sounded very sad and hopeless, but I didn't go upstairs because the stairs seemed like it wouldn't be able to hold any weight. Even if they had been able to carry my weight, at that point I definitely was too creeped out to even consider investigating the humming. Apart from all these weird feelings and sounds, we also didn't feel at ease because it felt like there was a dog waiting around the corner. We didn't hear or see a dog, but it scenes that might require a content warning. He tried, so the content warning is anything. He tried to put an end to the bug riders by capturing them and starving them in their basement, or in his basement. Apart from that, it is said he hung some of them as well. If all that's written about him is true, he will be responsible for 57 murders. I'm pretty sure the voices and humming I heard coming from the attic were from the thieves that he had hung. And now for the weirdest thing. It is said that the owner of the house still haunts the estate, not just as a humanoid ghost spirit, but in the shape of a big black dog. I honestly swear I did not know any of this when we visited the house. Even years after the visit, I get chills when I think about it and how it felt. There was a dog at the house when I visited. She also put in a link to the house. I won't share them because of privacy reasons. That's so creepy. Holy crap. I think you're very brave for just visiting those kind of places. I think it's so scary. But I think putting out the lights downstairs and running upstairs to my bed is also creepy. Okay, on to the Reddit ones. Also, thank you so much for sending in that story. And I can guess you have a lot of creepy stories. Urban. Okay. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from my family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side. The real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving for about 45 minutes and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired out of nowhere? Well, yep, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any places that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over the side of the road into the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody who was going to come past. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22 and then fell asleep. Sometime later I was awoken by a scratching sound. Scratching sound. I looked at the clock. It was 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound did not stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was a damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched the couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate. After that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a freaking car parked off the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything. And all of a sudden, this guy comes up sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, hey you, get the fuck out of your car now. I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story, don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. I'm sorry. You will never catch me doing that. Okay, this one is 100% true, even though most people I tell this to in real life don't believe me. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up until late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times, and I would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forward, back and forward, back and forward, back and forward. I was a little scared, so I grabbed toward the bay window of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown covered in blood and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to sleep. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the door to prove that there was nothing there. I kicked and screamed all the way, trying to make him stop, but he kept on pulling me. Finally, we got to the door. He unlocked it, swung it open, and said, "See, there is nothing there." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at the both of us and slowly stood up with the knife. My dad slammed the door and got my mom to call the police while he went on and got his gun. He went back to the door with the 12 cock and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her that the police were coming, and she freaked out, grabbed the knife, and walked away. The police found her 50 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I never slept in the living room again. Oh yeah, this is an edit. I forgot that after she left, my dad called and warned my crazy uncle lived next door what happened porch with his shotgun. When she walked by, he pointed it at her and just said, "Keep moving, bitch." That is so funny to me. This is so creepy. But him just standing there on his porch, just keep walking. It's not me tonight. Nope. Okay. This is a short one. About 15 years ago, I was basically my parents' live-in nurse. One night, a couple days before Halloween, I'm in my bedroom and I hear my dad's pained wail scream. He had phantom pains from losing his legs, but they could get pretty intense at times. I heard it clear as day. It was louder than usual, but it was definitely the 10 out of 10 super bad phantom pains. I pulled up, ran down the hall to my parents' bedroom. Empty. I look through the house and find them both watching TV in the living room. My dad looks perfectly fine. I asked him if he screamed. He said he didn't. And neither of them heard anything. The TV wasn't loud enough to hear from across the house. Plus, they weren't watching anything that would have a scream like that. I think they were watching White Christmas. Great movie. And the scream sounded almost like it was right next to me at the time. They swore up and down that they didn't hear anything. That's probably the creepiest experience I had had around Halloween. That's crazy. Okay. On to the next one. This one is a long one. I like to think that I take my personal safety very seriously. I don't stand too close to the road while waiting for the walk signal. I have my location shared with my sister and my mom. I keep my wits about me when I'm out in public, and I try not to dawdle after getting into my car. If I had only been more diligent about the last row, I might not be in the situation I am in right now. So, early this morning, just after midnight, I was sitting in my parked car outside of my favorite grocery store. I was exhausted from picking up a friend's evening shift, and so I stopped to grab dinner on my way home from work. The store is an isolated part of town, but I had never felt unsafe in this area. Then again, I had never been so late at night. The second I exited the store with my purchase, the old cashier closed up the shop for the night and turned off all the lights in the building. For some reason, I did something I never do. I started eating in my car. As a precaution, I try not to linger in isolated parking lots, especially as a young woman who often has to run errands after dark. Maybe it was hunger, or maybe the fact that due to a recent breakup, my house hasn't felt all that welcoming in the past few weeks. In any case, I was in no rush to return home. I pulled up an episode of The Terror on my phone and settled into the seat. I enjoyed a few minutes of blissful peace and quiet before a shout pierced through the night. I looked up from my phone and was surprised to find a woman standing in front of my car, waving her arms at me. My car was parked right in front of the store, facing towards the building, and there was only a thin sidewalk separating my vehicle from the store emerged from the brick wall before me. She rounded my car, coming to a stop beside the driver's side window. She then started pointing at the ground, the universal sign for roll your window down. Fat chance, I thought. Though she kept sane and kept, I had no clue what her intentions were. In fact, I felt pretty vindicated in always locking my doors immediately after entering. The woman, perhaps seeing I was making no move to exit my vehicle, then told me something no one wants to hear. "Hey," she shouted, "there is someone in your backseat." My mouth went dry. Time seemed to slow as 1,000 horror movie scenes raced through my head. I could almost feel the piano wire digging into my neck, the barrel pressing into my temple. I undid my seatbelt and prepared to launch myself out of the car. Now that the intruder knew I was aware of the presence, would I even have time to run out? With one hand on the door handle, I stole a glance into the rearview mirror and saw no one. My car is a compact hatchback, meaning there's very little room for a person to hide in my cabin. Even in my exhausted state, I would have noticed someone upon looking into my mirror. Terror faded to confusion. I turned around in my seat, surveying the cabin with my own eyes, and confirmed there was no one in my backseat. Click, 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 click. When I turned back around, the woman had taken a step closer to my car. Her body was barely a foot from my door, and her fingers were wrapped around the handle. There were a few more deep clicks, click, 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 as she tried, unsuccessfully, to open the locked door. I raised my gaze and she gave me an odd smile. I'm kidding. As though she and I were sharing a private joke. For the first time using the faint glow of the street lamp, I took a closer look at the woman's face. Her skin was stretched tightly across her skull, making her thin mouth and nostrils appear as though they had been cut onto her. Her eyes were deep set and ovate, and her teeth seemed both too small and too numerous. Reminds me of the film Smile. I allowed myself a brief moment to gawk at the face before me, and then I threw my car in reverse and hightailed it out of the lot. For a few disheartening seconds, the woman held onto the door, keeping in step with my vehicle as I backed up. Luckily, she soon let go and I drove away, my mind racing with the realization that the woman was trying to bait me out of the car. Even more disturbing was the fact that it had almost worked. I wondered if she had others with her that I simply hadn't seen, and what she had wanted for me. I hoped I had narrowly escaped a robbery as opposed to something much more sinister. I got back to my house 20 minutes later, still shaking from my encounter. I rushed inside the house and made sure that all of my doors were locked. My exhaustion did little to soothe my nerves. My mind played tricks on me as I got ready for bed, conjuring up flashes of the woman's face in the dark corners of my house. Once I fell asleep, my fears followed me from the waking world. I had a long, vivid nightmare, most of which I have either forgotten or is irrelevant to this account. All I know is that when I jolted awake, some hours later, it was to the sound of frantic banging on my door. I sat up in bed, unsure if I was dreaming or not. My alarm clock read 4:17. It was far too early for someone to come to be knocking on my door, unless there was some kind of emergency, which the forcefulness of the knocks there maybe have been. Slowly I rose from my bed and inched towards the entryway. I had never before been in such a situation and was at somewhat of a loss as to how to react. I didn't smell fire, thankfully, but that didn't mean all was well. Suddenly I heard a man's voice call up my name in a questioning tone. It sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Who is it?" I called back. "Brian," answered the disembodied voice. A relief washed over me. My neighbor Brian lived in a house across the street. We weren't close exactly, but I often saw him walking down the block with his dog Bailey. I turned on the entryway light, but as I was still in my sleepwear, I didn't want to open the door unless I had to. Instead, I called back, "What's the matter?" "Well," he began. I heard his voice crack and he cleared his throat. "Do you have someone over right now?" "What?" I asked him, my heart skipping a beat. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" "Well, the dog had to go out, and while I was in the yard with him, I thought I saw someone in your front window. Someone who didn't quite look right." I still, feeling as though I were in some terrible dream. Turning around and glancing down the dark hallway, I wished I had turned on my lights on my way to answer the door. "She followed you home," I thought. "She's in your house with you right now." I was ready to bolt out the door into the cold, but by some miracle, I had just enough presence of mind left to consider my neighbor's words more carefully. I stepped away from the door. "Are you alright, Brian?" He cleared his throat again, and when he next spoke, his voice sounded slightly different from before, as though he were testing out a new timbre. "Of course, I just got a bit of a cold here, but I still wanted to check in on you." My voice wavered as I voiced the question to my neighbor. "But your dog, isn't it a girl?" Brian didn't respond. My mind reeled in a torturous silence, trying to discern whether the threat was outside the door or inside the house with me. After a full minute of complete stillness, the handle to my front door began to move. It rotated doors as far as it could before the lock stopped it, then shook as the person on the other side of my door pulled on the handle. This happened several more times as the person tested my lock, and there was a powerful bang, as though someone had rammed into my door with all their might. After that, there was silence again. I stood frozen in place for another minute. I had no people, but I worked up the nerve to walk into the living room and peer through the blinds into my front yard. In the distance, walking down the street away from my house, was a figure. Although I couldn't see the face, something deep inside me, or deep within me, knew it was the same person who had tried to open my car door. I Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night. I split my time between roaming the perimeter of my house, looking for anything suspicious, and sitting in my kitchen running the events of the night in my mind. The most likely explanation was that I had been dreaming. After all, I had been nearly baited into opening my door to potential criminal just hours before, so it made sense that I would have a nightmare about a similar situation. Then again, I had never in my entire life had a dream so wild and so vivid. Maybe somehow the woman really did follow me home. She easily could have stuck a tracker on my car. But how in the world did she know Brian's name? And how had she impersonated him so well? The sun is setting now. I haven't left the house all day. I have been too haunted by the idea of someone or multiple someones trying to draw me out into the open. No matter how much time I check on the house, I still feel as though glimpses of the woman in my periphery, of her beady eyes and uncanny smile. I suppose I should try to get some sleep now. Impossible as seems at this point. I just need to jot this down before I went to bed, in case A. anything happens to me, and B. you ever think about blindly trusting the warnings of a stranger. Okay, so the next one. In college, I would go home every other weekend to work at the job I had since high school. I would drive directly from campus after my class on Friday to my job, about an hour. And after my shift was done, I would go back to my parents' house, which was out in the middle of nowhere. My parents weren't yet home when I got back from work. They often spent their Friday and Saturday evenings drinking like they were the ones in college. So the house was dark, and since it was mid-fall, so was the yard, save for the yard light. I pulled into my normal parking spot, got out of the car, and then turned to open the back door of my car and get my backpack out of the back seat. That's when I noticed that the bathroom light was on. Was that light on when I pulled up? It must have been right. As I was contemplating the light and reaching for my backpack, there was suddenly a very angry-looking old woman standing in the window staring at me. We're not talking resting bitch face here either. She was pissed off at me, and I knew it. We stood there staring at each other for a good 10 seconds when my parents pulled up in the driveway and distracted me from my stare down with the woman in the bathroom. By the time I turned back, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. The house my parents built was not over the top of anything, but it was an old farmstead. So when they bought the property, there was an old farmhouse, barn, and blacksmith that were eventually razed and became a giant bit of the lawn, a pole barn, and my parents' garden, respectively. I had lived in that house for roughly 20 years up to that point and never had anything even remotely weird happen there, but it wasn't exactly the last thing that happened either. During winter break that same school year, my parents went on their annual month-long vacation to somewhere warmer and left me home alone. During that time, I was putting in as many hours as I could to pet the bank account before heading back to school for the spring semester. I would leave in the daylight in the morning, and since I live in the upper Midwest and it was winter, I would come home in the dark. There was no reason for me to use any lights in the morning while I was getting ready, so I wouldn't. But there was a handful of nights during that period where I would come home and that bathroom light would be on. No woman in the bathroom, just the light. Or I would be in my parents' office, kitty corner front bathroom, using their computer and hearing something in the basement. Goes downstairs to see what it is, and then hear footsteps walking upstairs by the bathroom. My room was in the basement, so I knew exactly what it sounded like when someone was walking upstairs. In all these years that I had been in that house alone, again, drunkard parents, I had never been afraid of anything. But those few months as a 20-something-year-old man, I was. I lived there for another year and a half and have been back numerous times since then, and nothing has come even remotely close to the freaking me out the way that I was during those few months. I wonder who that woman was. Okay. About 5 years ago, I lived down in a major city in the US. I have always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short street in order to look back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was a silhouette of a man. A dancing man. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, heading straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open, wide and wild, head tilted slightly back, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and a smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but stood looking skyward, a smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again but kept my eyes on the man. He did not move. Once I had put out half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no was moving very, very quickly. I would like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and it only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He did not look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Damn. That one got me. Okay, the last one. A couple of years ago, I was stressed out from college and big city life and decided to spend a long weekend in the woods, doing what my city friends consider utter lunacy and us outdoorsy people consider nirvana, deep woods, free camping in the winter alone. While this sounds like the beginning of a missing persons report, if you're an experienced outdoorsman, it is pretty safe. I also take pleasure in being the white trash warrioress my dad always hoped I would be. I always hated the feeling of claustrophobia that came with being female in a city, avoiding eye contact, not walking alone at night. When you're a girl alone out in the woods, you're in charge. You're safe within the warm embrace of your own solitary freedom, or so I thought. I spent a few hours on the road, the surroundings getting wilder and wilder as I drove. I parked in an allowed roadside ditch, and with a compass and a map, hiked until I was in a mile's reach or so of some good ice fishing. I was at least 4 miles from the road. I made an extremely discreet camp in a clearing with just one little hole in the snow for my tiny tent and my tiny campfire. After a couple of beautiful days of just hiking and relaxing around the camp, I made a trek to the fishing hole. Everything was in utter winter stillness. The air was crisp, and the only signs that I wasn't in a perfect vacuum were the twitterings of birds and the very distant rumblings of half-frozen waterfalls. After silently celebrated my compass skill when I came out at the exact place I had intended to. I pushed a hole in a thin crust of ice and set to getting my fish on. My first catch came quickly. After weeks under a frozen surface, fishes be hungry and shit. I was feeling oddly fatigued and jumpy, so I decided to just clean the fish here and now and take it straight back to the camp to cook. I quickly realized my fish preparation skills were rusty at best. I cursed my lack of preparation as I got myself from the second time. Something in my peripheral senses was irritating me, but I was very set in my task, focusing on the motions in the slippery mess. The thing in periphery was growing more irritating, like the buzzing of a fly or the yammering of a sibling. I carved and hacked and sliced my hands open freshly as the fish slipped out of my hands and into the snow. Frustrated, I shouted, "Fuck off with that whistling, will you?" Silence resumed, and then my heart stopped. Living in a college neighborhood, I had grown so accustomed to white noise that I had failed to recognize how grossly inappropriate the sound was in context. The silence weighed down on me as I broke into a sweat. The only reason a human would be this deep in the woods would be to hunt. And no hunter would give himself away like that. And if he was whistling for any other reason, shouldn't he have reacted to my outburst? Yelled something vulgar back. Apologized. No, nothing. Just this total stillness of the woods. Silence as pure as it was before I spoke. Unsure if I had misheard the twitterings of a bird or something, I just decided the fish was lost cause. Slung my gear over my shoulder and headed for camp. I trudged off in the woods, and about a quarter-mile from camp I saw a large mass protruding from the snow. Apprehensive but drawn like a moth to a flame, I trudged up to what materialized in the closing distance as a moose kill. A really, really, really good moose kill. Everything. A clean shot through the upturned eyes, staring at me and saying something that was imposing a sense of dread on me, but a dread I couldn't translate. I ran hard and I ran fast. In the snow and the woods, everything looked the same. I knew I was moving south, and I knew I had passed the camp on the east. I made for more the road, eventually slowing down to a weary trudge, calming at the comforting sight of the woods, clearing ahead to make a way for the country roadway. I looked to my left and saw my car 50 yards or so down, jogged to it, and drove the lonely 15 miles to the first motel I saw signs for. I had none of my belongings and no earthly idea what I had just abandoned ship like that. It was only as I was sitting up watching infomercials that night that it started to fall together. Why would the Park Service issue free camp passes for the same stretch of woods that they allowed hunting? The moose defied everything of my rudimentary understanding of hunting. Even with the snow to cool it, decomp starts quickly on animals that size. You would have time for a few quick pictures, but you would want to have it dressed quickly. Why would you kill a moose 5 miles into the forest? How could you ever drag it back to the road? In the morning, in a sleep-deprived and paranoid state, I described everything I had seen and thought I heard to a very confused park ranger. He seemed more vexed about illegal hunting than any of my crazy city girls' ramblings. He said he wanted to come pick me up and have me taken to where I thought the kill site was. I said I was only going if he had He sighed with expiration and told me when to meet him. We rode out to the woods on an ATV, with me awkwardly riding on the back as if on the back of the world's awkwardest motorcycle. We got to a large impression in the snow where the moose had been. Blood was everywhere. There was also a distinct track of carcass being dragged. The drag marks made a smooth trail in the snow, as if the carcass were on a tarp. The ranger said he should take me back now. He asked where my camp was. I pointed in the direction of the drag marks. It looked like he was finally sharing my unease. Back at the hotel, I washed my clothes in a sink and prepared to drive home in the morning. An unknown number called my phone. It was the park ranger. The moose had been dragged to my campsite. He described the scene as a huge mess. He wasn't sure if an animal had helped to make the mess, but one thing was clear. Someone had cut into my tent with a knife. I asked about the rest of my belongings. He said darkly, "You don't want them back. They are covered in moose mess." So, what happens now? Well, miss, we're just gonna keep an eye out for this guy. I haven't heard or seen anything like this ever before. I'm really sorry this happened. And that was it. No closure. No explanation. In the years that have passed, I've tried every different application of reason. A hunter who needed help, but knew I was already gone. A deranged psychopath looking to make a second kill. One of the few friends I shared the story with envisioned him as some deep-wood Sweeney Todd. He dubbed him Moosey Todd. I still don't know why I didn't hear the gunshots. The whistling seemed so vivid in my memory, but was it even real? One question has been definitely answered. I will never go into the woods alone again. Okay, so guys, that was it for this book.